Know thyself. Is there a virtue to knowing yourself? It's a relatively new thing in terms of popularity for people to be devoted or determined to know themselves, to find themselves. In fact, it was popular only for a short time. But you had these two children from the same family go off to college. One comes back with a PhD in some field. The other comes back having found himself. But what does he really come back with? Or as somebody once put it, I found myself, and it's not exciting. There's nothing to get excited about. So what was the point? What was the purpose? What was all that searching all about? In a certain sense, knowing yourself seems to be narcissistic. What is there to know? Why is it important to know what you are and who you are? It seems indulgent and egotistical. In fact, some of the happiest people in the world, the most pleasant people to be with, don't know what you're talking about when you say know yourself. They can't imagine why anybody would want to do that because they're busy knowing other people. The legitimate side to knowing yourself in terms of Yiddishkeit and how that fits into being a Jew is because to know yourself means that you know whether you're climbing or sliding. If you don't know where you are, you don't know what you are, then you don't know whether tomorrow will be better than today or not. And it's important to know that. So if you can't put your finger on what you are, then how do you know whether you've changed or whether you've changed for the better or worse? That's what happens very often when people decide that they're going to become something, they're going to amount to something, they're going to change, and they change for the worse. You say, what did you do? You were better off before. Before you got this ambition, before you became so rich, you were a nicer person. You were a more decent person. But you weren't content and you decided to improve. But you didn't improve. You made things worse. You're not a nice person anymore. So how does that happen? The intention is to become good, but you turn out to be worse. How can somebody end up regressing when their intentions were so noble? It's because they weren't clear on what they were starting off with, and so they weren't careful to not lose it. And that's why in order to proceed in Yiddishkeit, in order to grow as a Jew, you have to know not only what you're still missing and what you need to gain, you also have to know what you already have, because in grabbing for more, you could lose what you have in your hand. And then it's not progress, it's regress. If you're a good teacher, but you want to become a principal, so you become a principal, but in the process you forget how to teach, is that an improvement? An improvement or a regression? There's a story about a guy who came to daven in the morning, and he wasn't davening. So they asked him, what are you waiting for? And he said that, well, he in fact was davening, but that he had got stuck on a word in the davening, early in the davening. And he's trying to puzzle out the meaning of this word. What word was it? He got stuck on the word ani, from modeh ani. He got stuck on the word ani because he got up in the morning and said the modeh ani, as you're supposed to, first thing in the morning, and he said, I acknowledge before the living king, but he got stuck on the word I. He asked himself, who is this I? Who? Who is this person who is acknowledging? And he says, I'm still working on it. I'm still trying to figure out who it is that is saying this prayer, who's making this bracha. And that's considered a virtue because with what do you come before God? What are you bringing to Yiddishkeit? What are you offering up on the altar of Yiddishkeit? It says by Avraham that Avraham got old and arrived in his days, which is another way of saying that he got old. But what it really means to say is that when he arrived, when he got to the end of his life, it was with all his days. Every day had meant something. Every day had counted. He could point to any day in his life and say, that's the day I became better in this way. And that day I became better in another way. Every day something improved, something grew, something got higher and better, so that every day he could account for. Most of us allow many days of our life to slip through our fingers, and they might as well be erased from the calendar because nothing happened. So this knowing yourself in a Jewish context is not an egotistical, indulgent thing. You're not contemplating your navel. It means living with an account, being accountable for your time, for your days, for your activities, for yourself. So knowing yourself does not mean indulging in amateur self-analysis. It means living with an awareness of a responsibility. And that doesn't mean being good, because you can be good without feeling responsible. What it does mean is this: a person who believes in God and who has a talent for faith and for trust and for belief can very successfully and with certain amount of virtue dismiss himself and the world and its technicalities and its problems and just do what God wants him to do because God wants him to do it. And that's it. The Gemara tells us of one of the great sages. When he was on his deathbed, he started to cry. And the students asked him, "What have you got to cry about?" A lesser person on his deathbed might cry. That we understand, because he has regrets. He's not yet finished. He left certain things undone. He's not ready to face his maker. He's a little nervous for the final test. He hasn't crammed, so he's not ready to go yet. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, what are you crying about? And his answer surprised them. He said, "Because I don't know where I'm going to end up." And they said, "Well, what's the question? What in the world is it? What do you mean where you're going to end up? You're at tzaddik." And the explanation is that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was a tzaddik. He was a scholar, and learning was his whole life. Torah was his whole life, and every moment of his life, not just the waking moments, but even while he was asleep, he was immersed in the study of Torah. He had never stopped to think about why it was his thing. Is he doing it because it's his nature to do this? Or is he doing it because of some He never stopped to think about that. Is he doing it for God's sake, or is he doing it because he wants some selfish benefit? He never stopped to think about that. He had no time. Because if there was a moment available to him, then he was learning. He was learning Torah. To sit back and ask, why am I learning Torah? He had no time for that. But on his deathbed, there came a moment. As he came closer to dying, there was this moment where he could no longer learn. He physically was incapable of learning. So he had a moment which he hadn't had all his life. He had a full moment. So what does a tzaddik do with a moment? He thinks, am I doing this for the right reason? So as soon as he had that moment to reflect on his motivations, that's what he did. So he started to cry because he had only 1 minute to check that whole thing out, something that he hadn't looked into all his life. And that's fine for Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, because he learned all his life, and in the last minute he checked it out to see if it was all on the up and up, without any ulterior motives, and of course we know that he didn't find any ulterior motives. So he lived the life of a tzaddik. He was totally immersed in Torah, and for the 2 minutes, the last 2 minutes of his life, he also became a Baal Tshuva. So for that moment, he grappled with, where is my interest? What are my motivations? And that was enough. He took care of whatever he had to take care of in those moments. But we see that a person who can completely turn himself over to God doesn't find any need to take his pulse, to look at himself in the mirror, to check to see if his Yetzer Hara is sending signals or if it's godly soul sending the signals. He just does what he's told to do. And if you should stop this person and say, why are you doing this? You've stunned him. You've caught him by surprise. And there's a great virtue to that, obviously. It's innocent. It's unassuming. He's ingenuous. It's without self-consciousness. And it's wonderful, but it's not responsible. In the Gemara, it talks about the mentality of a slave. And the Gemara concludes that a slave wants to be a slave. There's an attraction to being a slave that we can't that makes it so that we can't necessarily assume that a slave wants to become free. You have to ask him, what is the attraction to being a slave? There's no need to be responsible. We're not talking about a crooked slave. We're not talking about somebody who's stealing from his master or cheating in his work. We're talking about a devoted slave who enjoys his work. And he doesn't want to be free. He doesn't want to stop being a slave, because then he will have to become responsible for himself. And so he feels devoted instead. It's a nice feeling. He wants to stay that way. And that's why the Torah talks about the Jewish slave who can be a slave only for 6 years. And at the end of 6 years, he has to go free. And the Torah says, what if he doesn't want to go free? What if he says, I like it like this? I like it here? Then there are all sorts of laws concerning how that person should be treated. But why would anybody like it like that? The answer is because there's no responsibility. What then does a slave do? What emotion, with what momentum does a slave function? With devotion. You become devoted to your master, and you simply enjoy serving him, which is nice if your master deserves to be served. But at the same time, it's only one dimension. He's experiencing only one emotion, and that is devotion, loyalty. But responsibility he doesn't experience at all. And the Gemara's debate is, are you doing this person a favor by freeing him? Is it always a benefit to give him also responsibility? And the Gemara says you have to ask the person. Some people don't want responsibility, and therefore you can't assume that you're doing him a favor by setting him free. Obviously, the meaning has to extend past a literal slave, because we all study Torah and none of us have slaves, and we aren't slaves. But there has to be a message in it for us as well. In our own life, we attain the level of slave in Yiddishkeit quite easily. If God wants it, then fine, so I'll do it. Out of devotion, out of loyalty. After all, I'm a Jew. So you talk to me about Shabbos, I can't ignore it. I'm Jewish. I belong. And since I belong, I have to take it seriously to some degree. But that's not responsible. I'm not taking responsibility for my Yiddishkeit. I'm merely going along with it. What is the advantage of taking responsibility? If everybody was serving God out of loyalty, functioning on devotion alone, a lot of good things would get done. A lot of the things that God wants would get done. But all these good things might very realistically miss the point of what God ultimately wants. Good things, God is fully capable of doing good things himself. And the proof of it is Shabbos. How did Shabbos become holy? Because God made it holy. He's capable of doing that. He's fully capable of making Sunday holy, and Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, the whole week. And then there'd be nothing but good things in this world. So the fact that a good thing was done doesn't yet tell you what God wanted, and that was done. What does God want? God wants goodness that doesn't come from heaven. Goodness that comes from heaven, and he's got plenty of that. He wants goodness, holiness coming from someplace other than heaven, which leaves the earth. There aren't too many options. He wants goodness coming from you, not from him. If I put aside my ego, I set aside my personality, I completely ignore all of my idiosyncrasies and do just what God wants, then where is this goodness coming from? In a sense, it's coming from him, which has its advantage, because then it's real, then it's true, then it's without my craziness, without my personal interests mixed in. So it's pure and it's authentic, it's the real thing, and there's a time for that as well. But on the other hand, there is this virtue of where is the goodness coming from? Is it coming from what you are, or is it in spite of what you are? If it's in spite of what you are, then it's coming from God, and what you are remains unimproved. What God wants is that goodness should be coming from you with your faults, with your hang-ups, you as you are. The Mitzvah of Circumcision might serve as an example. There's the question of why is it that God arranged in his plan for creation that the Mitzvah of Circumcision should be painful to the child? You would think that if God had planned that there would be such a mitzvah as circumcision and that would be part of Yiddishkeit, he could have also planned it and built it into creation that circumcision should physically be painless. He could have arranged that, like piercing your ears is not painful. What makes it even more interesting is that if you do kill the pain, halachically, if you anesthetize the kid, then the mitzvah is not being performed properly. It almost seems to be saying that the pain is a necessary part of the mitzvah. So Hasidus explains that in fact it is. When the physical condition experiences pain from a mitzvah, that basically is a description of the most mundane condition of the physical world. Mundane is one step below physical. The physical world is uninterested in holy things. Mundane dislikes holy things. It's actually uncomfortable with holiness. The mitzvah of circumcision is one of the greater mitzvahs, and there's a condition in the physical world that objects to this mitzvah. The body complains and says, I'd rather not. Not I'm indifferent. I'd rather not. I object. I'm upset. I don't want this mitzvah. The body is saying this, not the soul. And yet into that most ungodly condition, where godliness, where a mitzvah is so foreign that it's actually painful, even there the mitzvah reaches. Which means to say that if you give the anesthetic, then the mitzvah hasn't affected the most unholy of conditions because you've tampered with the condition. It's like saying, wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have an evil inclination? Then we would do all good things. So of course, if we didn't have a Yetzer Hara, good things would be done. But who would be doing them? God would be doing them. He didn't create the world so that he should do mitzvahs. He created the world so that a physical human being, with his own flaws, with his own distractions, would muster all of his energies to do a mitzvah without getting out of his condition, his human condition, but remaining in that condition, and in that condition choose to do the mitzvah. There's a question concerning the two holidays of Purim and Yutes Kislev. The Alter Rebbe was arrested by the Tsar, and eventually he was freed. He was told that he may go and teach Hasidus. He was exonerated. He was told it's a good teaching, it's not revolutionary, it's not subversive, he can teach it, and it's good for Jews to learn it. And that was on the 19th of Kislev. On Purim, after the miracle of Purim had occurred, Mordechai became a hero. It says that many of the non-Jews in that kingdom converted to Judaism. So there's the debate as to which is the greater accomplishment. On the one hand, the non-Jews who were in on what was going on with Haman and Mordechai and that whole story, when they saw how great Mordechai was and how lousy Haman was, they converted to Judaism. Can't get better than that. They became Jews. On Yutes Kislev, the government officials who were in on the slander against the Alter Rebbe found out that the Alter Rebbe was right, that he was a good man, but they didn't convert. They said, go out and teach Hasidus. But they didn't convert. They remained Cossacks or whatever they were. So which is greater? One opinion says, obviously Purim is greater because it moved the non-Jew to actually become Jews. They went all the way. They converted to Judaism. Another opinion says, Yutes Kislev is greater. If a person is moved to convert to Judaism, then obviously he's a special person. He's not an average non-Jew. Particularly according to the explanation in Kabbalah, that every non-Jew that converts to Judaism really had a Jewish spark in him to begin with. So fine. The finer, sensitive, more enlightened became Jews. And that's nice. But what is an even greater accomplishment is that these same Cossacks who had no intention of becoming Jews, they were not enlightened, they weren't special, they didn't have Jewish sparks in their soul. They were Cossacks like before. The same Cossacks who were out to kill the Alter Rebbe. And they said, go out and teach Hasidus. Now that is an even greater accomplishment. When godliness reaches down a rung, not just to the most sensitive among them, but down to the cutthroat, even as he remains a cutthroat, even as he remains a Cossack, if you take him out of his condition, so it's like giving the kid the anesthetic and then performing the bris. So you've tampered with the condition, and if you've tampered with it, then the holiness is not reaching the most unholy of conditions. So it's almost like when the Cossack who was looking forward to executing another Jew suddenly realizes that this Jew is special, and he walks out and he tells his friends, and he writes in it, and he describes the book that the Alter Rebbe wrote, and he said, it's a good book, you should read it. And then he goes back to work in the prison, because that's his job. That's what he likes to do. And then he comes home after that and he tells somebody to learn Tanya. It's a good book. There's a certain advantage to that, in that even in the condition, untampered, as it was, even there can be some godliness. Even there, holiness can reach. So, know yourself means simply, God wants you to serve Him. And it's true, you is a very insignificant and laughable thing. And we need to know that. And we need to spend much time reminding ourselves and convincing ourselves of how truly insignificant and lowly the you is. Because it's true. And at the same time, for some inexplicable cosmic reasons, God likes insignificant, unimpressive, flawed little beings and wants them to do goodness. That's what He wants. You can't argue with Him. So when a person comes along and says, God wants me to serve Him, what does He mean, me? What good am I? He has better people serving Him. He's had great tzaddikim serving Him. He can take care of Himself. And yet He needs me to serve Him? I'm a nobody. I'm a nothing. I'm no good. I'm unreliable. I'm petty. And therefore, I won't do the mitzvah. I can't believe that God cares whether I do this, that, or the other. So the analysis is true. The conclusion is wrong. It's true that you're insignificant and laughable and petty and so on. It's all true. But the conclusion that therefore God couldn't care, how do you know that? How do you, the insignificant, petty, laughable being, how can you assume what God wants or doesn't want? You're contradicting yourself. You're saying I'm too insignificant and too feeble and too petty to make any difference to God. And at the same time, you turn around and tell God what He wants. You tell Him to go look someplace else. You tell Him that you have a better idea. That's not true humility. So the analysis is correct. The conclusion is wrong. It's precisely the flawed, imperfect, insignificant, petty human being that God wants to get some goodness out of. And therefore, He wants you to do the mitzvah. You, the flawed, imperfect, petty, insignificant being. So what's the virtue of knowing exactly how imperfect I am? What's the virtue of knowing exactly how insignificant I am? Because for whatever reason, that's who God chose to be His servant, to be His partner in creation. Another important thing. Beyond running an errand for God, beyond the act of doing a mitzvah, God also wants you to serve Him by acquiring certain traits. A Jew is supposed to be modest. Modesty is more of a trait than an act. And what if you don't have that trait? God wants a person to be charitable, not only to give the charity, but to be charitable. What if you're not? Torah spends a lot of time, and many pages are covered with descriptions of not acts of mitzvahs, but of dispositions, of attitudes, of personality traits that Torah prefers, that Torah wants. To not be hot-tempered, to be forgiving. What if you're not? Love your fellow Jew. What if you don't? So all of these character traits that we're supposed to acquire, we can't acquire unless we know who we are. We can put on tefillin without knowing who we are. We can keep kosher without knowing who we are. We can keep shabbas without knowing who we are, because those are acts of mitzvahs. But if you're going to become more charitable, who's becoming more charitable? And more charitable than what? So you have to know who you are and how charitable you were yesterday, whether you were charitable yesterday. And then you can proceed to become more charitable, however that process, whatever that process is. So now the question is, suppose I find out who I am. I find out that I am too immature to be responsible. I don't have the ambition or the self-control to change my personality. Then what? Can we really change? And what is the process of change? Theoretically, or ideally, a person can change everything. Everything. From one extreme to another. One of the famous Hasidim in the times of the Alter Rebbe had a history similar to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was ignorant until he was 40 years old. He blossomed late in life, but then he became the teacher of teachers. This man, the Alter Rebbe's Chassid, was not only ignorant, he was dull. It's not that he hadn't learned, he had no capacity for learning. In grade school, his teachers gave up on him and told him to go learn a trade because he couldn't master the aleph beis. He simply had no intelligence. There was no clinical term for it. He was just plain dumb. And his teacher said, "You are too dumb. Go do something else." And yet, he came to where the Alter Rebbe lived and saw young men repeating what the Rebbe had said intelligently, articulately, and he couldn't get over it. Here he was, a man in his 40s, and he could barely remember the first words of the Rebbe's talk. The explanation, the questions, the answers, that was completely beyond him. And yet here, these young men are sitting around repeating it. He became very jealous. To make a long story short, he would listen to the Rebbe speak, and then he would go up on the roof where nobody would find him or disturb him, and he would drill it into his head, those few words that he could pick up, to make sure that he could remember them. Hours he would spend lying on that roof, so that no one would see him drilling into his head the few words that he had picked up. But in a few years, this man had turned himself from a total klutz into a genius. The Mittler Rebbe wrote a sefer that is very esoteric, and some of the more learned Hasidim once came to the Rebbe to ask for an explanation. And the Rebbe was busy, so the Rebbe said, "Go ask Yekusiel." And this was the guy who was thrown out of school because he was too dumb to learn aleph beis. And he really was. It wasn't a teacher's mistake. So for years, he literally, as the expression goes, broke his head over it. His head had been sealed like a rock, and he cracked it open, found the potential intelligence, and became a genius. Not everybody's going to do that. Not everybody's going to go from one extreme to the other like that. Not everybody has the devotion or the willpower, the lasting power to work on himself for so many years, starting with nothing. But what it does say is that a person can change things in himself. Realistically, small changes, reasonable changes, and particularly in those areas where we don't find that much resistance. The person who has absolutely no compassion, who's going to sit down and work on acquiring compassion, is going to find that it's a very difficult, lifelong task and may not succeed. But a person who has a little compassion and wants to have more compassion, in other words, he has a feeling for it, but he hasn't quite developed it yet, that's a more reasonable, more realistic goal. A person can expect to have some success without becoming a hero. What is the process? How? How does one acquire a trait? How does one change an emotion? How does one change a personality? Truth of the matter is that even if we do nothing, we change. The very fact that we go from being a child to being an adult is a great change, and we do very little to make that happen. Sometimes we're actually working against it, and it happens anyway, in spite of ourselves. We grow up, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, which means that there's a change going on simply with the passage of time. The old expression, what wisdom can't do, time will do. Because with the passage of time, you change, you mature, you soften, you become sensitive, you become more of a mensch, without any effort at all. But that process can be encouraged. You can speed it up. So it's not like you're going against your nature by changing something in yourself. You're going with your nature, only you're intensifying it. You're merely rushing the process, which is sometimes very necessary because it's not happening fast enough and it needs a little boost. How do you change a personality? A person is made up of 3 parts: head, body, and legs, and they correspond to intelligence, emotions, and behavior. The head, of course, is intelligence, the body being primarily the heart is the emotion, and the legs being the active, the going and getting things done, implies behavior. Of these 3 parts, the hardest part to change is in the middle. The emotions are the hardest thing to change. The mind is not difficult to change because the mind is open to change. That's what a mind is all about. A mind is inquisitive, curious, mind wants to know. That's what intelligence is. And so the mind is constantly asking questions. The mind is constantly saying why, how come, maybe not, maybe yes. So it's open to change. The mind is easy to change because of its virtue, because its openness to change. It wants to change. It looks for new information, for new insights, for more growth. The heart is in the middle. By nature, it's not open to change. It doesn't go around looking for someone to love. It doesn't say, who shall I have compassion for? If it bumps into a really sad case, compassion is aroused. But it doesn't go looking for trouble. And unless a person is really maladjusted, you don't go around looking for someone to be angry at. Someone make me angry. It sometimes happens and you get angry, but you don't go looking for it. So the heart, unlike the mind, doesn't go looking for activity. The mind looks for intelligence. The heart doesn't look for emotion. On the other hand, the heart is unlike the mind in that it's not seeking greater experiences, but it does have an opinion, unlike the legs. It has its fixations. This is me. I feel like this. I'm not in that mood. So it won't go out and grow, but it also won't let itself be moved. It's the passive-aggressive within each person. It's passive in that it doesn't go seeking greater experiences or greater virtue, and on the other hand, it won't let you do it either. It just wants to sit where it is. The mind changes simply by feeding it the right stuff. South Africa, a couple of months ago, they were celebrating a week of lectures and displays and publications called the Week of the Jewish Woman. And one of the sessions was for the husbands, for the men. After we had talked about marriage and getting along with your spouse and things of that sort, I met one of the men who had attended the lecture. And he told me that he was very grateful for the program. What was he grateful about? He happens to have a good marriage. His parents had a good marriage. No great changes had occurred in their marriage because of this lecture. But he was very moved by the fact that marriage was something to talk about. It had never been treated that way. Marriage was marriage. Who's your wife? Who's your wife? Everybody has a wife. Everybody has a husband. What's to talk about? That there's actually a role for the brain in marriage that he didn't know, and he was being sincere. After all, what can you say about marriage? You get married, and marriage is a subject, not only for the heart, not only for the feet, but also for the head. That was something new. And he called some of his friends, and he said, did you ever think about this? Did you ever think about that concerning marriage? And all of them said no, they had never thought about it. So it had somehow given his marriage another dimension, a third dimension. And obviously that makes a difference. So what happened here simply is a mind that had not been fed this particular diet now responds to this new input and blossoms. So the mind grows, changes readily. Give it good stuff and it'll change. The place where the mind is in a certain sense the most crucial consideration. The emotions we can dismiss and say, okay, so it got out of hand. So you lost control, you lost your temper. So you weren't in the mood when you needed to be. Like you weren't compassionate when you should have been. You were distracted, you were busy with other things. Your heart didn't respond. We can dismiss this, although it's not necessarily something we ought to do, but we do. We can and we do dismiss a person's failings when it comes to emotions, because emotions are that way. They can't be trusted, you can't rely on them, and so you're not that disappointed when they fail you. The crime of passion, for example, what can you say? Guy got carried away, he couldn't help himself. But when the head is out of control, that we don't forgive so easily. And that we can't overlook so easily because there's no excuse for the mind to be out of control. There's a famous story about the Berditchever Rebbe. A chassid came to him and he said that he had sinned. He was single and he had a girlfriend who was single, and they had sinned. But he said she had gone to the mikveh first. And he thought that that would somehow soften his sin. By the fact that she had gone to the mikveh, it wasn't so bad. And to his surprise, when he said that, the Berditchever stood up and told him to leave the room. Had he not said that they had gone to the that she had gone to the mikveh, the Berditchever would have tolerated it. Because if you tell me that you got carried away and you sinned, okay, let's talk about it and let's correct it. Let's not let it happen again. Because human beings are human beings. But when you say she went to the mikveh, that means that the two of you got together, you decided you were going to sin, but you didn't want to do sin X, you wanted to do sin Y, and in order to do sin X, in order not to do sin X, you have to wait 7 days so that she can go to the mikveh. So you counted off the 7 days on the calendar. How many days left till we sin? 6 days, 5 days, 4 days? That's not a crime of passion. A crime of passion means your heart gets out of control, so that you're not obeying your mind, and therefore it does things that you do things that you yourself don't agree with. But as soon as the passion is over, the mind regains control and you're back to normal. But if in 7 days your mind didn't regain control, then obviously it's not a crime of passion. Then your mind is not right, and your head isn't on right. And the Berditchever said, that I can't help you with. Tell me you're human. Tell me you're weak. I'll help you. But you tell me that you cold-bloodedly planned to sin, premeditated sin. Well, what can I tell you? Whatever I tell you won't make any difference. I'll tell you, don't do it. You know not to do it. To tell you how to be stronger, how to control yourself, you didn't even try to control yourself. So what's to say? You wanted to do it, you planned to do it, and you did it. So what do you want from me? So when the mind is sinning, when the mind is not what it should be, we have very little tolerance for that. Because you should have known better. So where the mind is, looking at it from a positive side, to say, for example, a person who comes along and says, I don't feel like being good, I have no desire to be good, I get no pleasure from being good, but I realize that that's the way one ought to be. So even if he's not good in fact, there is something positive about this person. His head is in the right place. Sooner or later, he'll be okay, because he sees clearly. A woman came to Beis Chana, and from Beis Chana she went off to Crown Heights, studied there for a couple of years, and then dropped out. For whatever reason, she dropped out. 2 years later, when we were talking, she says, oh, I don't do this anymore. I don't do that anymore. I'm not so observant. But who am I kidding? I said, what do you mean? She says, come on, I know where it's at. Don't ask me why I'm doing this. I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm crazy. But I know where it's at. She asked some of her friends who are modern Orthodox. She says, come on, what are you doing? What kind of garbage is this? I mean, either you're in or you're not in. Either you're doing it or you're not doing it. So she knows the score, and she knows what the score is even though she's not keeping score. She's not doing what she knows she ought to do, but you can't confuse her. You can't tell her that 2 mitzvahs out of 10 is good enough, or that keeping halfway kosher is satisfying. What do you mean good enough? Who are we kidding? So her mind is in the right place, and there's a certain sense of inevitability. Sooner or later, she'll be doing what she has to be doing, because if her mind tells her, and she's not playing games in her mind, she's not trying to convince herself that God never said, thou shalt not. He only said, it's not a good idea. I mean, those kinds of games, she's not doing that. So if she's not doing that, then eventually, in time, what her mind says will affect the heart, and the heart will affect her behavior, and she'll be fine. On the other hand, when a person says, my heart's in the right place, that scares me. What exactly does that mean? It's like when people say, nothing personal, but, and you say, I wouldn't mind if it was personal, just skip the but. When they say nothing personal but, so their heart's in the right place, thanks a lot. But you don't want to hear what comes later. So when people say, well, I feel Jewish in my heart, but it's not a good story. Simply because you feel in your heart does not guarantee that you will become that way, that you're going to behave in the way that you feel you ought to. So there's the importance of the mind being in the right place that is greater than the heart being in the right place. A person says, I'd love to help you. I'd love to help you. That doesn't do you any good. When a person says, I know that I should be helping you, sooner or later he'll be helping you. If not tomorrow, the next week. But sooner or later, something good will come from that. When the person says, I'd love to, nothing's going to happen. So, in changing oneself, the first thing you have to change is, what are you convinced of? What are you certain about? In your mind, what have you learned? What have you read? What do you know? One of the great frustrations with secular education, liberal arts education, is that when the person sits back after graduating and getting into real life, grappling with real life issues, you want to look back and say, what do I know that's going to help me be a mensch? You think back over all the subjects you've taken, and there's nothing there. You don't know anything about being a mensch. You know subjects. But there's nothing in your mental diet that will nurture you when you need to be nurtured out there in the real world. A little bit of Torah, a little bit of learning, even as a child, sooner or later, in your adult life, that little bit of knowledge is not only interesting and you remember it and you repeat it to your children, it's actually vital. That little bit of knowledge, someplace, somewhere in your life, will serve you. It helps you do and be what you need to do and be at a given moment. That's the part of the significance of people in a crisis who suddenly revert back to something they learned in Cheder. They hated Cheder, but somehow something they learned in Cheder is relevant to them in their adult life. Nothing they learned in college is relevant when they're in a crisis. Something their mother told them, and they hated being told by their mother, and yet something that their mother said is suddenly relevant and important. When it gets right down to it, that's the wisdom you need to be able to live your life. So if the mind was given a healthy diet, even though it's not a complete diet, it will help you, it will serve you. Changing the heart, when it needs to be changed, can only happen after the mind has been set right. Once the mind has been set right, then by nature the heart ought to follow, and eventually probably will, but eventually can be 30 years. Because of our confused state, since we went into Golus, and particularly in America, what the mind says doesn't affect the heart, even though it's supposed to by nature, because we're confused. The flow of information has been disrupted, not only from generation to generation. It's the flow of information from the mind to the heart that is disrupted. What in Hasidic terminology is called timtum halev, when the heart is plugged and the waters of wisdom do not flow to the heart. Here's where a person says, I know I ought to, I have no excuse for not doing it, but I just don't feel up to it. Or I'm not inspired to do it, even though I know I should. Listen to the radio, and this question comes up. You know, the radio psychiatrists, the radio therapists, all those talk shows. And this question comes up all the time. I know I ought to, but it's probably 90% of all the discussions there. I'm going out with this guy, and I really shouldn't. I mean, he's not good for me. I don't know why I keep going. I just keep going. And all sorts of variations on that theme. The answers are valuable and useful, but what lies behind it all, the question itself, what does it mean that you know that you should and yet you don't? Take a closer look. You can go looking for reasons, for compelling motivation to not do what your mind says you ought to do. You ought to go out and be successful in business, but your partners once told you that you're a loser. Your parents told you that you're a loser, and that forces you to continue losing and failing. So what basically they're trying to do is, you're telling them that your mind says, yes, I should succeed, and you're not succeeding. So now we have to go and find out what in you is also saying no. And that's useful. Sometimes that's the way to find the solution. But what does it mean? Something in you says no when your mind says yes. Since when are there two opinions? You have only one mind. Who else offers opinions besides the mind? My mind says yes, but my foot says no? What kind of foot says no? What does a foot know one way or the other? It doesn't say anything. So what does it mean? There's another reason. There's other forces. There shouldn't be any other force. The human system is a totem pole, and it works in only one direction. Starts in the mind, goes down to the heart, and from the heart to the hands and to the feet. And that's it. It's vertical. It's not a dialogue. So from where do you suddenly get two opinions? If there was an opinion concerning right and wrong, then you would say, okay, it's your evil inclination and your good inclination. So you have two opinions. But we're not talking about right and wrong. We're talking about doing a job. It's not a question of good or bad. It's not a moral issue, and yet nothing happens. I ought to, I know I should, but nothing's happening. In a very famous discourse a couple of generations ago, the Rabbi explained that there was a nation, lived in Israel or near Israel, who Moshe was told that he has to wage war against them and defeat them before he dies. Midian. It was one of the last things he had to do before he died. Hasidus explains that these nations, the 7 nations that had to be kicked out of Israel before Jews could move in, basically represented the 7 emotions. 7 character traits that were evil. Each one of those nations was the embodiment of one of the evil traits. We might say that Germany, for example, was the embodiment of obedience, evil obedience. Midian was the embodiment, the personification of discord, the inability to get along. The word Midian itself means arguments. What is this personification of the inability to get along? If somebody bothers you by doing something to hurt you, you're obviously not going to get along. You're uncomfortable with that person for that reason, because they hurt you. A person takes away something that could have been yours or should have been yours, fine, that bothers you. You don't see eye to eye, you don't get along. But Midian was not a nation that had complaints against other people. Everybody has that. Midian is the trait which we all have within us, that place within us where we can't get along with another person for no reason at all, not because of anything the person did, just for the fact that the other person exists. In other words, I can be bothered by someone in many ways. The primal, most fundamental discomfort that I suffer is the existence of another person. Not what they do to me or don't do to me, whether they like me or they don't like me. The fact that they are and they're not me bothers me, makes me uncomfortable with that person. And I can't get along with him simply because he is not me. I get along with my friends. I get along with my family. I get along with people who like me because they're part of me. They're from my group. They're my gang. They're my world. My clique. Mine. Then it's okay. Then they can exist. But anything that isn't mine, how dare you exist? There's nothing besides me. Somebody can be a mensch and not be me? That makes him equal to me and separate. And that threatens me because something in me says that only I am. And when I find out that somebody else is and doesn't need me, how can that be? That itself bothers me. It diminishes my significance. He didn't say anything. He didn't look at me the wrong way. Nothing. But that he exists without needing me diminishes my significance, and I can't stand that. So this very primal initial discomfort when you meet another human being. He walks in, he talks, he thinks, he has an opinion, and he's not yours. And right away, you have to check it out. Is he smarter than me? Can I control him? Do I need to be afraid of him? That trait is basically the hang-up, the blockage that prevents my mind from reaching my heart. Because just as I can't stand another person, that part of me can't stand another opinion. This feeling that I am the ultimate refuses to hear what the mind has to say, because who's going to tell me what I need to know? So it's not that I have a compelling reason not to get a job. That's not why I'm not getting the job, even when my mind tells me to. I have no compelling reason not to. It's dafka, because no one can tell me what I ought to do, and that alone prevents me from listening to my own mind. So when a person is having a conflict between his mind and his behavior, between mind and heart, very likely the reason is this organic, primal refusal to budge, the rejection of all other reality besides myself. I am the reality, and therefore I'm not open to hearing anything that I don't already know, because to hear means that I need to improve. That suggests that I'm not as valuable or as perfect as I know myself to be. So that selfness that feels complete and final and finished, inflexible, unmovable, that's what blocks the mind from reaching the heart. I don't need to know anything, and therefore I don't listen to my own mind. How do you get around that? If your feelings are smug, you need something that convinces you that you can't afford to be smug. When a nation gets to be very confident of its own security, sooner or later something comes along, threatens the security, and you realize that you're not as secure as you thought. You do need some change, some improvement, some help. So the way to get around this timtum halev, this smugness, is to sit yourself down and say, wait a minute, why am I behaving like I'm perfect? Why am I behaving as if I've got it all together? I don't. And not just on this one subject. So you don't sit there debating constantly, should I get a job, shouldn't I get the job? Maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. Today I feel like I will, tomorrow I'll change my mind. That's not the issue. The issue is you know you ought to get a job, and yet you won't do it because you're so smug. So you need to punch a hole in that smugness, deflating it back to normal, and that opens the heart to what the mind has to say. If we don't do it ourselves, it sometimes is done to us. Sooner or later, Either events, fate, an act of God, or the guy next door is going to punch a hole in that smugness. A wise person doesn't sit around waiting for someone else to do it. He does it himself. You catch yourself acting like nothing can go wrong and nothing needs to be improved, then you have to sit yourself down and punch a hole in that and say, who am I kidding? I blew it once, I blew it a second time, I made this mistake, I made that mistake. How can I be smug? I can't afford to be smug. There's also another way. The other way is by starting from the bottom. A person can say, I know I ought to have a job, but I don't feel like it. I don't feel like it. I don't want to do it. Often the answer is, do it. You need a job, do it. What do you mean you don't feel like? What do you mean you don't want? You need the job, do it. And when a person says, well, I don't know, the problem is not knowing. You know that you ought to get a job. Go do it. I don't feel like it. What has that got to do with it? It's irrelevant. There are times when a person enjoys his work and there are times when a person doesn't. So if you don't enjoy your work, do you quit working? There are times when you have to skip the middle. Your mind says get a job, so your feet go and they get a job. What about the heart? Well, we're skipping the heart now. Sometimes the heart isn't into it. Sometimes the heart isn't up to it. Sometimes you enjoy it, sometimes you don't. But there are occasions when you can skip the middle step. You don't have to have your heart in it all the time. As a matter of fact, by nature, that is the nature of the heart, that it's not into anything all the time. And if you have to rely on your emotions, you wouldn't do anything regularly. So there are times when you have to say, look, the feet are ready to go, the mind says go, we're going. You don't feel like it? Skip it. Skip the middle section. And then what happens is, the mind is saying that it's the right thing to do. The feet are actually going ahead and doing it. So the heart is getting pressure from both sides, from the top and from the bottom. And that moves the heart into the right place. Even the most silly of examples, the stewardess who is taught to smile because that's part of her job, but she doesn't feel like smiling. She's not in a good mood. What does she do? The professional advice is just begin smiling. After 20 minutes, you get into a better mood. But you don't wait until you're in a better mood and then smile, because that may never happen. So at times it's necessary to go through the motions in order to get to the feeling that's supposed to be behind that emotion. And that's why in Yiddishkeit, it's not always acceptable that you don't do the mitzvah until you feel that it's right, that you won't do the mitzvah until you have a feeling for it. That's not necessary. On the contrary, you're more likely to create that feeling through the doing. It's the act that brings the feeling, not always the other way around. In fact, the act not only improves the emotion, it even improves the mind. Because the mind that says, let's do it, it's the right thing to do, doesn't completely appreciate how right it is until it's been done. And the actual doing strengthens the mind's conviction as well. So in knowing ourselves, to sum it up, there are three parts. First, what do you think? What are your opinions? What does your mind say? Secondly, what are your feelings? And thirdly, what have you done lately? The idea that until I find out what my mind and heart say, I do nothing, that's paralysis. That's an incomplete human being. As important as it is to know what you think, as important as it is to have the right feelings, it is equally, if not more important, to be doing the right things. A person checks himself out by finding out where he's lacking. A person could be doing a lot of good things but without feeling. A person could be doing a lot of good things without understanding. A person could be understanding without doing. A person can have the right feelings without doing. Whatever it is, you improve on what you already have, but you never give up what you have. So for a person to say, I'm doing all this good stuff, but I don't know why I'm doing it, so I'm going to stop. That's crazy. That's not progress. And that's why if a person doesn't know what's right about him, you don't know yourself, you may lose what is valuable in your behavior, what you already have that is valuable, you may lose it in your pursuit, in your rush to find out more about yourself. And in the end, you end up being less rather than more. And therefore, to know yourself in the best, safest way is to first find out what are you doing that is right. Whatever it is, do more of it. Put more feeling into it. Understand it better. That's the only safe way to go. A person says, I haven't done anything right. I haven't done anything good. Then he's not a mensch. He's lying. The same is true of another person. You want to help another person improve themselves, find out what they're doing right, and then encourage them to do more of it, to do it with more feeling, to do it with more understanding. You can't find anything that they're doing right, then you can't help them. To point out to them what they're doing wrong, that's not your job, and that's not going to help, just like it doesn't help with you. I keep telling myself what I'm doing wrong, doesn't make any impression. I don't want to hear it, even from myself, certainly not from somebody else. So we can change, maybe not in dramatic ways, but in significant ways. And the changes are usually along the lines in which we are already finding some success, where already we're doing a little bit of good. And we improve that by recognizing the goodness and increasing it, rounding it out so that it's three-dimensional. And this is all summed up in Chassidus, where it says that when you take an accounting of yourself, as important as it is to be honest about your faults, it is equally important to be honest about your virtues. To exaggerate your faults is dishonest and destructive. To underestimate your virtues is equally dishonest and maybe even more destructive, because then you have no place to start from.